Another problem that seems to be too big to handle and almost insurmountable is healthcare, and this is particularly controversial in British Columbia because of Bill 36 there. You want to talk about what your party's policy is on healthcare and how it's different from, say, the Liberals or the CPC?
I haven't looked at the platform in a while. I believe Max's position is a healthcare credit system.
Yes, yes. And you
Um,
and basically saying what I understanding is he says it's not healthcare, it's sick care, and that there's so much waste on bureaucracy, wasting so much money on bureaucracy. Canada has, my understanding is that we have one of the highest healthcare. We might be number one in terms of healthcare expenditure per capita, but we have some of the lowest outcomes in the G20. And my understanding, correct me if this is wrong, is that what Max is advocating is a more responsible fiscal approach to healthcare to solve those problems, get rid of the wastage, so that more money is actually going to healthcare and less money is being wasted on things like administration. Does that sound about right?
yeah, it does sound right, and I 100% agree with him on this. Um, bring so one of the problems is that we're a federal party, and to me, the mere existence of Health Canada is violation of our constitution.
I
So,
quite agree. Yeah, it is
so
a yeah, quite agree.
we're trying to do two things, right? Like we're
No.
trying to come in and fix healthcare, but in order to fix healthcare, you got to go through Health Canada, and if you go through that, it's like you're violating everything you stand for. But putting that aside, if we look at BC for the moment, and I hope I don't get the numbers wrong, in 2020, the BC province gave $100 million to the BC Nurses Union, and they said they wanted to have something called uh, they wanted to increase the ratio of
Hmm,
nurses
hmm.
to patients. I don't understand why you're the legislature, you're sovereign. I don't understand we have to go through a nurses union, but they did that 100 million in 2020. And then 2021 was like 150, 2022, 200, 250, 300, and they want to, I think, keep it at 300 for the next couple of years going forward. So there's a very brave woman in British Columbia called Corinne Maury, and she's running for provincial office. And she's looking into this right now. And what she's finding is exactly what you said, Leighton. A lot of this money, a lot of this increase is going to bureaucracy because
Hmm.
the number and what she found is the number of staff is increasing, the amount of money is increasing, but the number of hours that nurses have to work is not decreasing. It's actually
Hmm.
increasing. So
Hmm.
she believes that it's going towards the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
That's one of the problems. And again, heresy here, but if you really want to solve this problem, privatize it. If you want
Yeah.
to have a safety net, that's fine. Even if you want to have a full-on welfare system, for the love of all that is holy, don't have a single payer model.
Yes. And well, and this the problem is being compounded a couple of ways in British Columbia. One is obviously mass immigration, because our federal immigration minister has declared Canada unilaterally an open society with open borders. That's one serious problem. The other is that in British Columbia, uh, the province is still imposing a vaccine mandate on healthcare workers, which really is quite incredible when you consider. I mean, it's no secret that these drugs are dangerous to the point that many jurisdictions have banned them. But the BC government seems intent upon vaccinating everybody against their will as a precondition to them working in the healthcare system, which is driving very necessary healthcare workers right out of the province. And that type of bureaucracy is sort of endemic of the problem, isn't it?
It is, but I wouldn't call it bureaucracy. I call it clown world. Like you, yeah. By my last
Maybe they're
count,
synonymous.
yeah, yeah. There's definitely a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
Um, last count, 6,000 terminated nurses because they were unvaccinated. Um, that that money that was supposed to go to the BC Nurses Union, $100 million I referred to,
Hmm.
part of that was going towards hiring foreign nurses. So
Hmm.
you fire 6,000 of your own people, and you want to bring people from abroad to plug that gap. Um, and you're using taxpayer money to do it. Like it's this. I swear, this is clown world.
Hmm.
Bill 36 you mentioned earlier that made it a lot worse because now we don't have doctor-patient confidentiality, and they've codified vaccine mandates, so it's kind of strengthened it. That's another layer of insanity. And then you mentioned the COVID vaccines. Like I've been doing a lot of soul searching, and if we're gonna go down this road as a society, all right, fine. You want to legalize all drugs? All right, more power to you. You want to legalize, decriminalize dangerous vaccines? Fine, go take 50 boosters a day. Don't do it on the government dime. Don't force me to take it. That's a violation of the security of my person. Don't fire nurses for refusing to take it. Like I don't know what's going on, Leighton. I don't know if this is Klaus Schwab and he's got a series of levers and he pulls it and everybody falls in line, or people have just lost their mind, or maybe we insulted the bureaucracy by daring to challenge them, and now they're mule-headedly moving forward with their policies. I don't know. I
Hmm.
can't get into their headspace.
Yeah, there are a couple of federal bills actually that are making their way through the House right now that are rather frightening, and that would tie eligibility for things like Canada Pension Plan and employment insurance to vaccination status. So it's not just British Columbia. This is really going on throughout the country, and seems to be part of a broader agenda. But the healthcare problem, the healthcare crisis, is tied to something else that we were talking about earlier, which is immigration. And my understanding is the PPC has a different policy on immigration than the CPC or the Liberals. Quite different, actually. Do you want to talk about this? It's again ties into sort of a common sense approach. I doubt that being the person who you are, you're against immigration. I don't know any sensible person who is. Canada is a nation of immigrants. We need immigrants. But the policy of the PPC is more of a common sense approach to immigration. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I haven't looked at the platform, but by last reading, they're recommending between 100,000 and 350,000 immigrants per year. So right now, we're anywhere between 1.2 and 3 million, depending on how our prime minister's lying that time of the day.
How
but
many foreign
so
students are in the country? Yeah.
yeah, like how are they counting it? Who knows? Are they counting it? So it's drastically lower. Supporters of the PPC will point to that and say, this is why I support the PPC. Critics of the PPC on the more extreme side will say that's a Chamber of Commerce approach, and some people want a full moratorium on immigration. Uh, my my whole purpose in running and my aim in my through my campaign is to educate people and to say, all right, like what is immigration? So either immigration, you could take like a Chamber of Commerce sort of view where you're saying, listen, if we need labor, we have a free market economy. So I'm in British Columbia, I'm in Whistler right now. There's a resort, massive resort here. They just can't get enough Canadians to staff this mountain and the village. So they're going out to now they're bringing labor in from Ireland. It just fits their business model.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't really have a problem with that, and I think we shouldn't curb that. I don't think a federal government should come in and say no more immigration. But at the same time, there's another model. If you want to approach it, you could take the model that the UAE, the Gulf Emirates, takes. Anybody can come in. It's very easy to come in. You'll never get citizenship. So the reason I mention that, I'm not saying we shouldn't give citizenship, but we need to start being honest with ourselves. A big problem with immigration is it's exacerbated when you have social services. Like it takes decades to build and fund and grow these high schools. Same thing with hospitals. So it takes a decade to build this hospital and staff it and pay it and train people. It only takes 1 year for Trudeau to sign a bill and bring 2 million people in. Like that's a reality. It doesn't matter if the people coming in are black, white, purple, whatever in between. That's one thing we're not talking about. So um, I guess what I'm trying to say is, do we want to be a country where we just let everybody in for business purposes, or do we want to be a country that welcomes people in as Canadians? In which case, we have to drastically reduce the number, and because
Hmm.
we can't afford this.
And be more selective about them. And these have downstream implications. For example, in Calgary, the mayor and city council just passed a bylaw that would permit persons who are not citizens to vote in municipal elections. And of course, this sort of confirms a conspiracy theory about voter replacement that has been out there for a long time, and it's also tied into some of the agendas that are being espoused by supranational organizations like the WEF and the UN. What's your view on these? I saw on your website it's your view that these organizations have done more harm than good, and that we must begin to extricate ourselves from them. Why is it that you hold that view?
Well, before getting to the WEF and UN, so in your great province, you have a wonderful city called Chestermere, and Chestermere had a mayor, Jeff Colvin, and
Right.
he uncovered a lot of corruption that led directly to one of your cabinet ministers, Rick McIver, and Rick McIver just came in and sacked him and just
Yes.
removed him. A
Yeah.
few days ago, Calgary votes to let non-citizens have voting rights, and Rick McIver swoops in like this superhero to save the day. He's like, not on my watch. So you have, I don't know. To me, they're all guilty of sin, but sometimes they can get on our side. So Rick McIver has stopped that the ability to vote
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
non citizens.
Mm-hmm.
As for the WEF and the UN, I mean, the WEF is just I don't see nobody voted for this. I don't see it's a billionaires club, and they're putting out just the most ridiculous ideas, like
Mm-hmm.
you will eat bugs. Klaus Schwab he's come out his famous villain catchphrase, "You will own nothing and be happy." As
Mm-hmm.
much as I hate that guy, I can't really disagree with him because that's the direction that people are going in with
Yes.
no property rights. So and also his other guy, I can't pronounce his name, Haval Urari or something.
Yes. Yes.
I think he's probably the number one person you hate because he's the opposite of a Christian.
Yeah.
He's
He wants to
claiming he's
depopulate the earth.
well, he wants to depopulate the earth, and I think I mentioned this to you before. He's laying the groundwork for undermining anytime somebody on our side says, that I have a right to property, I have a right to my children. He came out and he said rights don't exist, like they were created
Mhm.
by man. Like I get that, like perception is reality. We've built a society, but over the years, we've come up and we've understood these things called rights.
Mhm.
But yeah, I hate that guy. He's a greaseball. The United Nations, like it was, I think it was cancer from the moment it was created, but it was created in the ashes of the Second World War.
Mhm.
And I think the liberal mind kind of got a hold of it, and they made a very, very basic and incorrect observation. They said if Hitler was racist, and if nationalism is what caused the Second World War, then the opposite of that, the destruction of nationalism, will make sure that we don't ever have any wars. And they've kind of been pursuing that. On the outwardly face of it, they say, we're here to prevent another Second World War, humanitarian crises. But I think they're trying to get rid of national sovereignty because they believe in their heart, if we get rid of borders, and if we take, if we have 10 white people here and 10 brown people here, if we do 5 and 5, then we'll bring about utopia. It's Marxist, it's communist.
Mhm. Mhm. And it's interesting. My issue with those organizations is largely because of their allegiance to this failed ideology, which Winston Churchill described as perfect equality. We all starve together. But what is the problem with socialism, apart from the fact that in its application in the 20th century it killed about 100 million people? But why is socialism it's so bad for Canada? Because again, this is another part of the PPC platform that socialism, and we're being force fed a steady diet of it by the current Liberal government and indeed by many of our provincial governments. But why is this so bad for Canada?
That's a really it's I'm not just trying to impress you, but that is a really good question. And um, what happens is on our side, we tend to say this a lot. Oh, it killed 100 million people. So many people died. It's never worked. All of these arguments, they just bounce off these proponents of socialism. They have a response for it, and at the end of the day, they don't care. My view is that the reason that socialism doesn't work is you could think of like every human being has a spark. We call it a soul. but it's like a flame.
Hmm.
We yearn to be free. We all men. I can't speak for women, but men, we want to be producers. When the trucker convoy happened, one of the reasons it fell apart is because everybody wanted to do their own thing. Everybody wanted to be the one that saves Canada.
Right.
Well, yes, that's bad, but it's also, it shows that like we want to be contributors to society. Socialism suffocates that flame. I think that's the ultimate problem, because it's the government coming in and you're just trying to sell a lemonade. Like, you get a lemonade stand, try to sell lemonades, and they're like, no, 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 you got to measure the sugar this way, and your cup's got to be clean that way, and you got to give us money, and you're just, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to go on
Hmm.
welfare.
Hmm.
That's my problem with socialism.
Yeah, and another part of the problem is, it really does lead to disintegration, social disintegration. We really cannot be. It seems that wherever socialism or Marxism takes root, you have a very divided populace, and part of the problem with that is destruction of some of our shared values. And you talked about some of them, individual rights and property rights. And part of the problem with the destruction of that, again, is when we go to our courts, what we're being met with is not a fair and impartial body. What we're being met with instead, what appears to be um, a very ideological people who have a certain political agenda, and this is being expressed in terms of something we call judicial activism. And I know you mentioned this on your website. You say, I believe that justice must be adjudicated by 12 men and women, not by elitist judges who bring their politics into the courtroom with them. I quite agree with that. But you want to talk about that a little bit, and why you think that is a really serious problem in our country?
Yeah, I mean, I can approach it from two angles. So from the high level, which I don't, I've never been, I wasn't in the court, but a lot of these times with like the provinces versus the carbon tax ruling, that'd be a good one.
Hmm.
Or the one that legalized medical assistance in dying here in BC. Like, no, this isn't the role of the court. We don't appoint these judges so that they can shape society into what vision they have for it. You know, we say that, you know, murder is a sin. Like, okay, did Peyman Askari hold the gun when he fired, or did he intend to fire? Like that's what they're supposed to do.
Hmm.
But instead, they're coming in. They're like, does Peyman Askari have a charter right to do what he did? And then they look at the charter and they just interpret it any way they want. That, like, the famous expression is from Roe v. Wade in the U.S., when they said, you know, this right to privacy is in the penumbra of the Constitution. And
Hmm.
it's like, wait a minute, what do you, who appointed this lunatic judge? Um, on the other end, like I'll be honest, like I've never actually gone into court, but there's a perception from the bottom level where government is just doing whatever it wants, and the people are powerless. Like, most average people can't, just don't have the energy to take this stuff to court. But
Hmm.
every day there's another regulation. Like, I just found out in British Columbia there is a rule that all burgers have to be well done. I asked the server, I was like, can you please make sure my burger's well done? She's like, oh, you must not be from BC, because legally we're obligated to do that. So that's like another regulation. But citizens feel that if they took that to court, the judge is going to be like, well, if the government did it, it's the will of the government, so get lost.
Hmm. Incredible. Well, in this context, how confident are you that our courts will uphold our cherished freedoms, like freedom of expression, in the face of new laws like Bill C-63, which is going to make criminal conversations like the one we've been having here today? Do you have any confidence in that, or do you think that in fact the courts will actually uphold the government's position that any speech which has the potential to offend, in fact, any thought before it gets to the point of speech that has the potential to offend, is criminal? Or do you think that there's breath and life yet in Section 2 of the Charter?
So I'm gonna share my opinion, which might not be popular, but I think our charter is just a poorly written document. Like, I think it's written in such a way that there's so many loopholes and you can take any off ramp you want, that it's very difficult to fault the court for some of the decisions they
I think
reach.
it
So
was
they
deliberately written that way, actually, Pim. I think it was deliberately vague in the way that it's written. And if people don't believe me, they should take our Charter of Rights and compare it to the American Bill of Rights, and you'll instantly see the difference.
I actually agree with you, and I would extend that to also the BNA Act. I know that was written a long time ago, but that thing is a mess. So you look at the U.S. Constitution; it's way clearer.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you could give the judges some wiggle room if they say, listen, technically speaking, you can make the argument that this Bill 63 is constitutional. On the other hand, I'm a big advocate of the concept of parliamentary supremacy, which means garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
And if we Canadians are so reckless and so irresponsible and so stupid that we're voting in these lunatics that are pushing through these lunatic bills, we can't then turn around and fault the courts when they
Mhm.
don't fix the mess that we helped create.
That's an
Um,
interesting perspective. I have not heard that before, but you're so right. You're so right.
it came to
Um,
me after the sorry if I could just be
Go
permitted to
ahead. Go
continue.
ahead.
It came to me after the Toronto police said, leave your keys out so the thieves can steal your car.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
on the face of it, that's a stupid thing to say. But the police, like their job is to minimize, death and damage to people. So they're looking around. They're like, well, something has caused all of this spike in car robberies. It's not the RCMP or the Toronto Police that did this, and we don't have the resources to deal with this. So we're just going to recommend that you put it outside your front door so you don't get like stabbed. Uh, so it seems stupid at first, but at the end of the day, the police are not there to fix all of the problems in society. That's our responsibility.
And again, coming back to the concept that's within the PPC platform, and that is individual responsibility, shared community responsibility, and limited government, which entails less reliance and dependence upon government. Because one of the problems is when we have a society which is dependent upon government, it simply invites the government to grow to exponentially to the point where the old saying applies that where government is big, the individual is small, and vice versa. And what you're saying and what the PPC is saying is that we want to live in a society where the individual is respected and has the ability to self determine. And the only way to do that is to construct a society in which the power of government is limited. So I quite agree with that approach, and I agree with much of what you've had to say here during our conversation. Very grateful that you've taken the time to be with us. I want to close off now with something we call the reading list. So I'm going to go first. I've got a couple of selections, and then maybe you could think about one or two, not necessarily a book. It can be a book or a website or some resource that you think you would recommend to our viewers and listeners that would enhance their understanding of some of the topics that are important to you and that we've been talking about today. So the first book that I'm going to add to our reading list is one of many books that are written by Dr. Thomas Sowell. I like to joke that he's written more books after the age of 80 than most people have read. I think he's 94 now. But this one is called Discrimination and Disparities. And the summary of it is that economic and other outcomes differ vastly among individuals, groups, and nations. Many explanations have been offered for the differences. Some believe that those with less fortunate outcomes are victims of genetics. Others believe that those who are less fortunate are victims of the more fortunate. What this book talks about is that it gathers a wide array of empirical evidence, as Dr. Sowell always does, to challenge the idea that different economic outcomes can be explained by any one factor. For example, racism. But this could apply to discrimination, exploitation, or genetics. And so this revised and enlarged edition of this book also analyzes the human consequences of the prevailing social vision of these disparities, in other words, diversity, inclusion, equity, and the policies based on that vision, from educational disasters to widespread crime and violence, which we are seeing in Canada. The other book is from the late Roger Scruton. This one is called Conservatism, Ideas in Profile. we use this word conservatism, but I find that many people who use the word don't quite understand what it means. And Dr. Scruton, to my mind, is one of the best, certainly the best modern author to explain what we actually mean by that. The way he does it is he looks at the central ideas of conservatism over the centuries, and he examines conservative thinking on civil society, the rule of law, and the role of the state on the one hand, and freedom, including freedom of expression and association, morality, equality, property, and rights on the other. And he traces the origins and development of the conservative ideology in the philosophies and thoughts of, among others, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, David Hume, Edmund Burke, Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, John Ruskin, Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, and others. And he shows how these ideas have worked out in the politics and policies of leading figures, people such as Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Disraeli, the Earl of Salisbury, Calvin Coolidge, Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher. And he also looks closely at the degree to which capitalism and free markets have been and are integral to conservative ideology and politics in the West. His clear, incisive guide in this book is essential reading for anyone wishing to understand the politics and policies of the West now and over the last 3 centuries. So those are my two selections. And with that, I'll turn it over to our guest for his closing comments.
I didn't listen to a single thing you said. I was just thinking about books. So I guess the first book I read one recently. It's called The Storm Before the Storm.
Oh,
And have you read this, Leighton?
No, and I'm always excited when our guests come up with books that are not yet on our reading list, and you've done that. So, congratulations with that. When you get to move on to the bonus round, what's that book about?
It is amazing. This guy went and looked at the Roman Republic, and he said before, like 150 years before the Roman Empire, and he said, guys, this isn't like Caesar came in and there was a civil war and it stopped the Republic. He goes, 150 years, the rot had started. So when the Roman Republic transitioned from, land owning farmers to all the land being centralized in the Senate, and then that divide in society caused people to abandon traditions surrounding politics, and it got increasingly more and more violent.
Wow, this
Basically,
is sounding vaguely familiar.
yeah, it didn't end well. So, but hopefully, our story will end differently.
Mm-hmm.
So, Storm Before the Storm, that's a good one. If you go on the Mises Institute, there's a free book by hope I pronounced his name right, Murray Rothbard.
Yes.
I think it's Progressivism in Canada, in America.
Yeah.
And it is eye-opening because I always thought that everything went to hell after the Federal Reserve and Woodrow Wilson. And he's saying, no, it was the 1860s. Corporations started coming in through the robber barons. And then the 1880s, corporations in the oil lobby. And then whenever it was 1890s with Theodore Roosevelt, he goes, that's when progressivism took off. So everything that we're dealing with right now with the administrative state, it's been like 140 years in the making.
Wow, that's discouraging, but very. It's a revelation. But hopefully we can at least understanding what the problems are, we can try to change them. And you have another one as well.
I'll give you a third one, and this one's specifically for you, Leighton. There's a video game I used to play in the 90s. It was called The Neighborhood Chronicles, and part of that is you got to walk past this wall, 40 wall sections, and there's text written on it, and you read it. The game was developed by two philosophers who wanted to give a philosophical spin on religion. Really? And you can find it online. It's called The Neighborhood Chronicles, The Wall of Records. And it's really beautiful. It's about prejudice. It's about overcoming adversity, and how the son is flawed compared to the father. So I think you'll like that.
Brilliant. Wow. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being our guest here today on Grey Matter. We appreciate so much you taking the time, and also all the work that you're doing. Your podcast is just brilliant. It's called In Lay Terms, folks. Please check it out. I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about Peyman Askari going forward. And I certainly hope that at some point he is in Parliament, and that he has given a high-ranking portfolio, perhaps a finance minister or something along those lines. But no, we're so grateful for you having been here and spent this time with us, and thanks for being our special guest here today on Grey Matter.
Thank you so much, Leighton, for having me on. You're doing God's work.